2024 meeting of the Planning Board to order. If everyone will stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, can we do a roll call, please?
Member Perry?
Here.
Vice Chair Angelides?
Here.
Member Grocott?
Here.
Chair Hubbard?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And we will move on to approval of the agenda. Do we have any changes?
I'd like to add a discussion topic if we could. I'd like to introduce a discussion on comparison of ordinances on synthetic turf.
Okay. So we'll make that 5B. Okay, any other changes? Okay, we will move on to audience comments.
We just need a motion and a second to
Oh,
approve
I'm
it.
sorry.
Okay.
Do I have a motion for adding 5B ordinance?
I motion that we add 5B ordinance, discussion.
Is there a second?
A second.
Roll call.
Member Grocott? Member
Yes.
Perry?
Yes.
Vice Chair Angelides?
Yes.
Chair Hubbard?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. And now I will move on to audience comments if we have any.
John Kurzman?
Hi, thank you. John Kirkland, 800 Way, St. Pete Beach. I could have the overhead. And you could zoom into the actual screen, please. There's been a lot of talk about what to do, now that we've had a big incident. And there's just a couple of things that have concerned me. I've got damage in my own home, not caused by the hurricane or the flood really, but it just makes it particularly interesting for me. And I've been speaking about these topics before anyway. One of the things that when you consider what to do, you start, of course, with what the current laws are. And one of the things I see in the 2021 ordinance is, with the 50% rule, it says that when you look at substantial improvement and substantial damage, that substantial damage does not, however, include anything that's required to correct existing health, sanitary, or safety code violations identified by the building official, necessary to assure safety, safe living conditions. So one might believe that if the damage is due to a hurricane or a surge, that perhaps the damage that now is being repaired due to the building official saying, hey, you need a roof on your house, hey, you need to fix your mold conditions, that may not be considered towards the 50% rule, which might be interesting as people say, hey, we need a rollback or we need to look back. Well, maybe those things aren't going to be covered based on the ordinance that went into effect in 2021. The next thing is when you look at the homes, the pre-firm homes that follow the 50% rule, if you have homes that have one house invested a lot in their home and have made it more resilient and has done a lot over the last few years, and another home did not, just ask yourself today, so you're now going to make it the home that invested a lot, you're going to say, no, you're the one that has to stop and raise your home right now. And the guy that didn't invest anything in their home to make it more resilient, that's the one you're going to say, oh, well, now you can spend up to 50% of your home before you have to raise it. Sounds a little backwards than what you'd want at this point. I understand looking back, you might have wanted to do something different, but where we are today, you might be getting the opposite of what we really want for our city to move forward. Also, back in December, when we had the other ordinance we were looking at, if you look at the discounts, we're a class 6 in our FEMA rules. And even if we went to a class 10, we'd only lose 20% discount. And if you watch the Cape Coral video, which I did, they kept talking about, oh my God, we might have a $50 fine per year per home. We have 2,000 homes. $50 times 2,000 homes is $100,000. Are we going to, force people not to be able to live in their homes for $100,000 across our whole city? Or could we maybe somehow spend that $100,000 worst case? I mean, I know we need to make sure that we don't lose our ability to have mortgages, but maybe we can figure out a way to keep FEMA happy enough, but let people not lose their ability to live in their homes. And then back when they were trying to look at this, they were trying to move people up, move us into class 4, which only would have given us a 10% savings on our insurance. Not a big enough amount. The other thing is, please, whatever you do, consider that you might want to help some people, but be very, very careful in what you're changing, because you need to realize that anything you change could have other ramifications. So there's the pre-firm homes and there's the post-firm homes. And some people have already worked hard, or they've already bought a home that they feel is at the BFE. And so any changes you make, if you now say, well, we want everything to be BFE plus T2, or we want to use this other map, well, if you do that, you might be forcing people now to have homes that have to be raised, that didn't have to be raised. And that would be a horrible thing, because then if we have to do improvements, we have to raise our homes that we already spent money to not have a home that had to be raised, that we just needed to do repairs on. So you can't do that to us. And that would also hurt all these other people that now or think that they're going to be doing what they need to do. What's going to happen next? And so FEMA also has the grandfathering clauses. FEMA has the things in there that say that, if it's pre-firm, you use the 50% rule, but if it's post-firm, it says right in the FEMA requirements, just make sure that they don't do things that break the rules. And these are in my slides. And then you've got all sorts of other issues that are in my slides I'll provide to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jackie Hubbard.
Hi, I'm Jackie Hubbard, Boca Ciega Isle. I just wanted to take just a brief minute of your time to say thank you guys, and thank you to the city. I've grown up in Florida. I've never experienced anything like this before, and the city, I've been very impressed with everything that you guys have been doing. So thank you for your hard work, your dedication to our city, to all of y'all up there and anybody watching that works for the city, including the staff, the firefighters, the sheriffs. Thank you. And all the contractors too. They've been very nice. Everybody who turned on our power, they were super nice. And the hauler people are very nice too. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
That's all.
Okay. We will move on to approval of minutes from the September 16th, 2024 meeting. Are there any changes requested? Okay, can I have a motion to approve as the minutes are written?
Motion to approve the minutes from the September 16th meeting as written.
Second.
Can I please have a roll call?
Vice Chair Angelides.
Yes.
Member Grocott.
Yes.
Member Perry.
Yes.
Chair Hubbard.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, are there any action items?
There are not.
Okay. We will move to discussion items. 5A is post-disaster planning.
Yes, we could get the PowerPoint pulled up. I also wanted to introduce the board to our new city attorney, Ralph Brooks, sitting next to me,
Thank you. Hello.
and our interim community development director is in the audience, Denise Sanderson.
Hello.
So we didn't have a lot of content for you this month. We wanted to still meet to go over some of the initiatives that the city is undertaking, items that we're thinking about. We're obviously in the early stages of a lot of this, but there are a few items that have moved forward to the commission, will be moving forward to the commission, and we just wanted to make you aware of them. So the first is just a short discussion on our emergency zoning ordinances. There was a two-part ordinance that was taken to the City Commission last week on Monday. One part of it was approved. The second item was returned for attorney review. It will be returning to the commission tomorrow for a vote. So after a state of emergency, the city is allowed to pass emergency ordinances that include some changes to zoning. It doesn't allow for any kind of change to allowable uses, but both of the items that were taken forward last week are related more to property maintenance than actual uses. The first was allowing equal changeouts of equipment in required yards. Currently, the city allows for certain equipment to encroach into yards if it's at grade, but if it's an elevated equipment, typically when they come in for a change out, when a homeowner comes in for a change out, the equipment needs to be made compliant with the zoning ordinance. We did, as part of this emergency zoning ordinance, allow for equipment change out without need to come into compliance if it's in the exact same location, same height, and so on, just to make it a little bit easier for people to get back into their homes after the storm and replace equipment that had been damaged by the storm. It's an emergency ordinance. It's only valid for 60 days. It did pass last Monday, so that is currently in effect. The second item that will be returning to the commission tomorrow is to allow for in-place elevation of non-conforming residences. This will come up. It's a discussion topic that's going to be on the City Commission's agenda tomorrow. But currently, the city allows for improvements to structures that are not compliant with setbacks as long as it doesn't exceed the FEMA 50% value. If it does, not only does the home need to be elevated above the floodplain, it also needs to be made compliant with the setbacks or a variance to be obtained. We have requested, as part of this ordinance, that a limited amount of elevation be permitted for residences that are non-conforming with the setbacks. We see this in a lot of the older neighborhoods where they were built prior to any kind of zoning regulations whatsoever. It would allow for structures to be minimally elevated out of the floodplain, no more than 9 feet, to allow for them to at least make those improvements without having to necessarily go forward for a variance or demolish the home, especially if the variance were to be denied. That is on the agenda for tomorrow's commission meeting. It was reviewed and modified by the city attorney from the item that was presented last week, but the substance of it has not really changed. It's still the same basic content. Like the prior ordinance that was approved last week, it would be valid for 60 days if it was approved.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Obviously, it would be unlikely to be able to elevate a home within 60 days. Is it just as long as you get your application in to start the process?
It would be based on the application, and this is something that could be extended in 60 days. They are able to extend it under the emergency ordinance provisions if we're still under a state of emergency. If not, it could be made permanent. It's just a kind of a bridge ordinance to allow that if someone wants to move forward.
The key from the legal perspective is you can adopt an ordinance on an emergency basis with just one reading instead of the 2 readings in the planning board. So after an ordinance is adopted as an emergency, it can then go through the regular adoption of an ordinance process, which will be coming to you and then going to first reading and then an advertised second reading to be made part of the permanent code.
Okay.
Brandon, I have a question on the first one. So my understanding from listening to the commission meeting was for the change out of equipment, that only applied to homes that were not substantially damaged. Is that correct? It was like the home wasn't substantially damaged, but the AC unit went out, so we're just allowing them to do a swap out. Is that actually correct? And if so, I kind of have a follow-on question. How is that going to be enforced that you didn't know that that home wasn't substantially damaged? And if it comes back that they come for permits for follow-on damage, what is the recourse?
So under the standard that a home were substantially damaged, the equipment is currently at or near grade on a hurricane pad. If they were to elevate, they would not, the equipment, if it were in a side yard, would not be able to remain where it is currently. That's a different process. Obviously, as they elevate, they're going to have to make other improvements. So that ordinance did not cover that. As we see permits come in for substantial improvements, substantial damage to structures, the building department is requiring that, let's say a homeowner comes in for drywall repair, or drywall replacement rather, they need to provide a FEMA packet, a FEMA evaluation of all the work that needs to be done for the structures. So early on, we would be evaluating that. Now, there are certain items that are exempt from the FEMA calculations. AC equipment change out is one of them, generator change out is another. So that is something we want to be looking at that stage. But if they were to come in for a permit for substantial damage, at that point, we would evaluate the placement of the equipment.
Okay.
And again, for the public, this is talking about putting equipment in the side setback. And that's a local requirement as opposed to elevation of the AC, which is controlled by FEMA and when that would have to happen.
Correct.
So just be allowed people to put things back in the setback area, which is truly just a local criteria.
With the consideration that if they had been damaged from the storm, that we would locally want to see them elevated if that was the reason that they were damaged.
Absolutely. There were two issues that we wanted to just talk with you about. This item in particular will be on the City Commission meeting tomorrow as a presentation, and this is the FEMA 50% substantial improvement and damage rule. The current requirement that the city adopted back in July 2021 is a 5-year look back on permits. However, there are significant cost exclusions for maintenance and repair work. A lot of that routine maintenance that homeowners need to undertake are completely excluded from the FEMA 50% calculation when those are repairs and maintenance of existing structures. So window and door change out when they're impact windows and doors going back in existing openings, any kind of mechanical equipment change out, roof repairs, things like that. Those do not count toward homeowners' 50% substantial improvement value when they are repairs to the existing structure. Any of these items as part of an elective addition, whether onto the side of the building, above the building, those are always counted toward the 50% value, but this allows for maintenance of homes without pushing up against that FEMA 50% value. There's some other considerations like this related to this that might come up. One of the items that was discussed in a public comment was substantial damage does include any prior substantial improvements, or sorry, non-substantial improvements that were made after July 2021 and the date of the storm. So if a property has had multiple elective renovations that aren't excluded, since that time, the damage does add in with those improvements to calculate toward the substantial improvement value. So not every homeowner is going to be facing a clean slate when they come in for repairs, but I just wanted to make that known. Staff will discuss the current and alternative options with the commission tomorrow. The first is a no look back period. This is the absolute minimum. It's a standard the city had in place prior to July 2021. A 1-year look back with no exclusions. This is what the city had vetted by the state. It was part of the ordinance that was presented to the city commission back in December 2023. It is not currently in effect, but it was part of a draft ordinance. And the third is the current standard, a 5-year look back with exclusions. We're also going to be talking about what happens if we don't enforce the minimum substantial improvement or damage rules that are required by FEMA as part of our participation in both the community rating system and the National Flood Insurance Program. That would be a significant negative impact to the city if that were to occur. The FEMA 50% substantial improvement damage rule does affect our ability to restore and improve structures without elevating or flood proofing. Of course, at any point in time, elective flood proofing, elective elevation can be undertaken for most structures, but this is the minimum requirement for bringing those structures into compliance with the FEMA standards that we will be talking about tomorrow. Second issue is the Pastor Grill restoration. Of course, there was significant damage citywide, a lot of damage down in Pastor Grill, and it didn't spare many of our designated historic structures. A few months ago, the planning board met with the historic board to discuss some of the code changes that are being proposed to augment design review processes. That is pending a city commission workshop and adoption. Unfortunately, we did have a workshop proposed with the city commission right before Helene, so that has been put on hold for now, but that is something that we're looking to take up in the future. Staff is discussing internally, and we will be holding a historic preservation board meeting in November to discuss some of the options for incentivizing restoration instead of demolition for historic structures when it's viable to do so. That could include faster variance review. We are looking at options for, and we actually just discussed with the state today, the option for structures that are being substantially improved on the inside, but not really changing the exterior look of the structure. If there's a way for us to expedite variance reviews for that, not reduce any of the standards. There are national standards that we need to look at for those variances, but for those structures that are eligible for FEMA variances, for the homeowners that want to undertake them, is there a way to move through that process a little bit quicker? I'll look for any kind of grants that may become available. Currently, there are bridge loans available, of course, to historic businesses. There's less on the residential side, but we are looking into the grants that might become available for historic structures. We are not currently looking at any process of expediting demolition. We do have one permit in for a demolition of a historic structure for the November meeting. That is not something we're currently looking at.
Brandon, I have a question. If I remember from our combined board that the properties designated as historic was a volunteer option. So does this open up the opportunity for more residents to join in and request to be considered historically designated?
Absolutely. That's one of the major incentives that we have. There are some ad valorem tax exemptions that are available. Many tend to take advantage of the FEMA variance. This is an option for those structures that weren't completely destroyed, to at least for the owners to request. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, they got a 50% variance from the 50% rule if they're designated historic. And some of the structures here might qualify. I think you have to be 50 years old.
Correct.
Or some architectural significance. So that's another option when we're considering 50%. Don't forget that one too.
Great, thank you.
In contrast, could someone opt out of being historic? And
so the city doesn't have a prohibition on demolition of voluntarily designated structures. If they've received some kind of a variance, many have received FEMA variances, the owner can't elect to remove the structure from the voluntary list, but they could always demolish. The Historic Preservation Board can put up to a 90-day stay on that, but it depends on the justification for the variant or for the demolition.
okay.
So we are also going to be discussing with the City Commission tomorrow a recovery task force. This is required by the coastal element of the comprehensive plan. As you may remember, that was just recently amended by the city in the last year or so. The primary needed responsibilities, there are 6 responsibilities of the recovery task force, but many of them have already been completed by the city. The initial damage assessment, things like that, those are responsibilities that we've already undertaken. The upcoming needed responsibilities will be hazard mitigation policy recommendation and post-disaster response with recommended comprehensive plan changes. As you're well aware, we will be taking on a separate process to look in detail at the large resort and the downtown zoning districts and future land use categories. These would be potentially parallel but additional responsibilities that this recovery task force undertakes. Staff has made a recommendation on membership. Again, this will be discussed tomorrow at the City Commission meeting. We're requesting that at least one member of the Planning Board, Historic Preservation Board, and Beach Stewardship Committees be a member of this task force, at least one member of an environmental organization, one that's more general like Tampa Bay Watch, or possibly the Sea Turtle Tracker, Seabird Sanctuary, and then a team member of the Tampa Bay Beaches Chamber of Commerce. The comp plan does require at least 2 staff members. That would be our emergency manager, our city manager or designee, as well as a member of our building department. The City Commission has discretion to add more members. They don't necessarily need to go forward with the staff recommendations, but these are the ones that we are going to be recommending tomorrow. Any questions? No?
Nope.
And the last items that I wanted to cover are some of the important, but they are items that we won't be addressing in the immediate future in the next week or so. The first is the comprehensive plan evaluation kickoff. Of course, looking at the large resort and the town center districts, the scope of that has not changed since the last time that we discussed this with the City Commission. We will be looking at starting that kickoff as soon as viable. We have pending projects. These are items that will be brought forward to the Planning Board at some point in the future. We are looking at potentially November or December. That is the Miramar Beach Resort. They will be returning. They needed to be re-advertised. You did look at this project last month, I believe, but they do need to return due to the addition of another request. And then the Windward Pass Resort project, that is another project the board has not seen yet that we will be bringing back to you for action. And the Community Development Department has expanded hours. I just wanted to make everybody aware of this. We are open Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., and that is through November 2nd of this year. Any questions, any discussion?
So the Miramar one, I thought I had understood it was just an advertising issue, and it was coming back as it was, but there's actually been a change?
So this was brought up at the last meeting, and they did add it in as part of the request, but they are formally requesting outdoor dining on the rooftop. That is its own portion of the conditional use permit request. So we would like, when that item is brought back, for you to take action on both.
Okay. So when that comes before us, will we be able to see a red line version that shows the changes from what we had approved last time?
I'll call those out, yes.
Okay.
Mhm. That is all I had on the shade other items. Yeah, and that's just a screenshot from our website related to the emergency permitting information. The city has on its website, stpetebeach.org, a list of exempt improvements that homeowners can make to their structure that do not need a permit, as well as some of the items that we're attempting to review in an expedited fashion, a one-day turnaround when we can. So I just wanted to direct people to the website when they have a chance.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions, and I'm trying to get them organized so that they're not all jumbled. One of them, the ordinance 2024-09, which is the one that is going before the commission tomorrow night. I don't know what's changed on that, but I did see some things in this ordinance that probably would need some discussion. For example, there's something about only going up 9 inches or whatever within the design, and yet the building has a height. So I don't know why we wouldn't let people go as high as they want to go.
So that's unchanged. And now we did change base flood elevation to design flood elevation just to remain consistent with FEMA. I believe that was just a limitation put in place for non-conforming structures. Structures that meet the required setbacks, they can elevate as high as they would like. They can elevate up
As
to
long
the...
as they meet the cap.
Correct. That is only for non-conforming structures that are encroaching into a required yard. The city did carry over that limitation on height.
Okay. And then if you're raising, let's say you have, 10-foot setback on one side and 3 foot on the other side, why would you not center the building, or, some of those things might be an opportunity to improve a situation.
And that was part of the draft, at least as presented. We would like them to relocate the building when it's viable to do so. It's in situations where, and we tend to see this in, like I mentioned, some of the older neighborhoods where the setback is non-conforming on both sides, and they can't relocate it to make it more compliant with the ordinance. In that case, they would be able to minimally elevate just to get the building out of the floodplain. But for anyone who could comply with the setbacks, we would be expecting them to do so.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right.
What would happen if they wanted to improve the elevated portion later on then? So if you elevate an old house
Mhm.
10 feet and then you come back and you want to redo that portion, would you have to tear it all down, or how would that?
No. You could, as long as you're compliant with the flood ordinance, the building department would allow you to put as much value into that as you wanted. Where the zoning limitation would come in would be if the homeowner wanted to add on to that structure in the future, the addition would need to meet the current setbacks.
Footprint can just exist permanently.
Correct, and someone brought it up at the meeting last week. It would almost be the wedding cake design, where maybe the ground floor that's elevated is set into the setbacks, but if they wanted to add another story, it would need to comply with the setbacks that are in place today.
Okay.
Could so let's say we've got a non-conforming structure, they want to elevate it to the required flood elevation, but that would put it over our permitted height limits. Is that just can't be done?
They would need to obtain a variance for that. It would only be for structures that, and we typically, at-grade structures, especially ones that have made it this far, they tend to only be 1 or 2 stories. But for those that are near the height limit, they would need a variance if they were to go higher.
Okay.
One of the things that I know has come up is the look back.
Yes.
And I did listen to the thing from Cape Coral, that video, and quite honestly, it was an eye-opener for me and totally changed the way I was looking at several things. One of the questions that I had was, they said that 5-year rollback, or whatever it's called, that if a storm occurs and you're dealing with damage from a named hurricane or storm, that the 5 years doesn't apply, if I understood it correctly. It's kind of like that resets the date.
That could possibly be their own
For
local rule.
significant damages, not improvements, but for significant damages, it was like a reset. That everything on damages goes back to the date of the storm.
So, correct, and it's both it's any damage that is needed to restore the structure to its original condition prior to the storm, whether or not those improvements or repairs are actually made. It's we make an evaluation of what needs to be done to restore the structure to the way it was prior to the storm, and that is what factors into this substantial damage calculation.
And I know that, again, at Cape Coral, they had to do their own calculations because they said the FEMA guide was missing things. And the way that permits had to be done was totally different than what I thought, because they basically said everything had to be permitted. And they talked about the documentation that you need to have. One of the things that caught my eye was when, I don't know, apparently, and if you haven't watched this, but I hope I'm interpreting it correctly, but they basically said they didn't care about local ordinances, state ordinances, they cared about FEMA.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you had regulations, they just kind of blew that off. So that got me to thinking about, why would we worry about, 1 foot over or 2 feet or whatever, because basically, if we're talking about a flood or where FEMA's involved, they're not going to look at any of that anyway, so why would we just not be consistent with what FEMA has? And I know that they talk about some points or whatever for savings on insurance,
Mm-hmm.
but really, when you look at the consequences, it seems like that's not really as important as some of the unanticipated consequences.
Understood. And our ordinance is we are required to be minimally compliant with FEMA to remain in the National Flood Insurance Program and to be part of the community rating system. The community rating system is the point reduction system. We currently have a 20% reduction on flood insurance rates due to our CRS score, but we are minimally compliant, and the ordinance that was brought forward last December is also compliant with FEMA. That we always send our floodplain ordinances up to Tallahassee. They look at the content and make sure that they're going to keep us consistent with the National Flood Insurance Program.
So when you say consistent, I guess I want to make sure that we're not exceeding. I mean, do we meet or do we meet and exceed?
We currently meet and exceed.
And that's what I'm wondering, since they're not going to look at that anyway. I don't know, I'm trying to understand the benefit of why we would do that.
It's important to realize that FEMA is actually two agencies. There's the regulatory side, and then there's the insurance side. So the regulatory side will have some minimums, but in order to get enough points, and they accumulate points for this CRS NFIP program, it includes everything from having brochures and posters and citizen awareness, all these things that are above and beyond just a regulatory thing. So you get points for design +1, points for design +2, you get extra points. And then where you fall on the CRS scale depends on those points. And it's an arduous process when they come in to do your points. Staff will tell you with their certified floodplain manager, it takes weeks to document all the things that they've been doing and trying to find other things where they could do them easily, like brochures, and getting points for those types of things.
And that's one of the options that's going to be brought up tomorrow. What if the city were to only be minimally compliant with the FEMA requirements, if it were just the absolute minimum standard to be compliant with the NFIP? We receive many points for other activities that we undertake that would not be affected if we were minimally compliant. And it's it's not a significant number of points. There are other ways to make it up, increased elevation requirements, how often we clean out the storm drains, things like that. There are many ways to earn points, but that's one of the options that's going to be presented, and that is the standard the city had in place prior to July 2021. No time between permits. Each permit could go up to the 50% rule. That is an option. That is the minimal FEMA requirement.
I would really recommend, if anybody hasn't seen it, that video was very eye-opening because they learned a lot of lessons the hard way. And they're sharing them, which is, I think, very important. Because like I said, it was a real eye-opener in terms of what you think you're complying and then what are the unintended consequences.
I'll send the link to the clerk's office so they have it in the public record, so that if people are watching this and want to watch it, they'll be able to ask the clerk for it.
Anything else?
Okay.
Thank you.
We can move on to discussion item 5B, discussion of synthetic turf.
So, thank you. While I was evacuated, I had some time on my hand, and this is kind of a pet peeve of mine as I see in our neighborhoods more and more synthetic turf going down as people replace landscaping. And so I did a little research. There is actually a chart out there of local Florida ordinances on synthetic turf, and I have asked Brandon the question, and I wanted to bring it up while he was here, so hopefully he can help clarify it for me. So, in some communities, it's very stringent as far as they talk about how pervious it has to be, down to like how many gallons per hour, how the life of the artificial turf. Some communities say it has to last 8 years. Some talk about where it can and cannot be made. Some talk about what it can and cannot be made of. And I think from a coastal community standpoint, it's all things that should be extremely important to us because of runoff, because of landfills, because of all sorts of things that, maybe we should look at some of these other communities and make a decision or consider a decision of incorporating some more stringent rules into our codes on that. So I did want to approach, have Brandon kind of weigh in on it and tell us like exactly. I see that it says when it talks about artificial, that it calls it non-pervious and how much it can cover on any lot, whether it be residential or commercial. And I see that it says it has to be natural looking. And then beyond that, I don't see any very specific guidance within our city codes. And so I would like some feedback, I guess, from you or staff on how that works for our city.
So we have a limitation along with other non-living vegetative material in terms of total lot coverage. So for the typical residential lot, at least 1/4 of the lot needs to be vegetative coverage. Beyond that, in terms of our standards for artificial turf, it's been primarily related to drainage. We've always asked for, what composite is underneath the turf to make sure that it drains effectively, but we don't have any product standards or anything like that. And I know you mentioned that in other communities, they do have higher standards for things like that, but.
So then what I'd like to do is, if we could send this to the staff and have a staff, maybe whatever the process is, send it out and put it into a future board so we can look at so everybody can look at what the other communities are doing and decide if we want to consider adopting something a little bit more stringent into our community standards. Great. If that's...
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I would like to learn more. And our comp plan and even our city core values include green initiatives and attempting to be more resilient. So if we're allowing a situation that isn't helping with that, then yeah, it deserves attention.
Great. Then you have the document, so I just...
Yes. I'll add it to
that
the
process
agenda.
is. I'm not really sure what that process is for distributing and then future follow-on discussion.
I'll pass those documents along to the board, and then I'll add it onto a future agenda.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Anything else? Okay, I believe we are ready to adjourn. This is my, this is my only second time adjourning the meeting. Do I need a motion, or can I just adjourn the meeting?
You can adjourn it or get a motion.
Okay, there's no opposition. I'll adjourn this meeting.